you.
You're welcome. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.
That's me.
So Maddie found the nest. Yes.
And that's Maddie. And this is the kind of nest she's looking at. It belongs to a really cute bird called the western snowy plover. Maddie is a biologist, and it's her job to go out to areas these birds breed in to spot adult birds, try to find nests, and to keep track of eggs and chicks. She's one of the many biologists across the state who does this because the western snowy plover is a federally threatened species and has been for over 30 years now. So I went out with her to look for these birds and their nests on a 270-acre dried out salt pond in Menlo Park. That dried out salt pond is one of 56 included in the largest wetland restoration effort on the West Coast. The total area that's being rehabilitated is a little larger than the size of Manhattan. Thousands of acres of land once used for salt production are being reverted back to their historic wetland state, with a few exceptions. Some ponds will be rehabilitated for waterfowl and migrant birds, while others will be kept dry for plovers and other species that benefit from a drier habitat. But it's a tricky balance. Wetlands are a crucial habitat to endangered species like the Ridgway's rail and the salt marsh harvest mouse. They're also a natural buffer to sea level rise. But the majority of Bay Area plovers are nesting on that salt pond project land. So the more dried ponds are reverted back to wetlands, the less habitat there is for plovers. And these contrasting needs are coming at an interesting time for the plovers. Recovery efforts are working. But if we want the plover to no longer be listed as threatened, there needs to be more of them. This is the story of a decades-long effort to help this tiny bird, how it's being balanced with a monumental wetland restoration project, and what it's going to take for the plover numbers to keep going up. The western snowy plover is a shorebird, meaning it can be found on the coast, and its range stretches from Baja California all the way up to Washington. But the majority of plovers in the greater Bay Area aren't on the coast. They're nesting on the salt ponds in the bay.
I think they've always been in the bay, before humans were there, and then when humans showed up, they just happened to modify the habitat for them in a way that they like.
Turns out they love dry, sandy, salty areas with minimal vegetation, aka the bay's salt production ponds. And even though there's a few hundred plovers hanging out on these ponds, they're still federally threatened under the Endangered Species Act for a reason. In the 70s, researchers noticed the coastal plover population was declining, so they started surveying the birds.
This population was declining, and it was declining in part due to things like humans intentionally planting European beach grass or Ammophila to stabilize dune ecosystems.
Remember, plovers don't like tall, dense vegetation around them, so they've got this invasive beach grass encroaching on their habitat on one side, and on the other there's coastal development, sea level rise, and erosion of sand. So their beach habitat was getting squished, which was likely contributing to their decline in the area. By the 1980s, there were less than 1,000 plovers on the California coast. This led to the petition to list them under the Endangered Species Act, and in 1993, they were officially listed as threatened. Since 2003, the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory has been conducting weekly surveys at salt ponds where plovers are known to breed. During these surveys, biologists count every plover they see, and importantly, they're also looking for nests.
I am looking at an adult female plover on a former salt pond that is currently sitting on the ground, and I am currently trying to determine if she is sitting on a nest.
When a biologist finds a nest for the first time, they go out to float the eggs. You know that trick to determine whether or not your store-bought eggs are still okay to eat past their printed expiration date? You put them in a bowl of water, and if they float, they're not okay to eat anymore. It's a similar concept here, but a floating egg isn't bad. It just means it's further along in the incubation process. By doing this, biologists can keep track of when the eggs are gonna hatch and the fate of the chicks. And we've gotta talk about how plovers nest. They don't make nests out of twigs and branches like other birds. The males scrape divots in the ground, and the female comes and picks the one they wanna nest in.
And the male can make like up to 50 of them, and she'll just be like, nah, not this one, no, not this one. But then when they find one they like, they'll start to decorate it with little bits of shell or different material sticks. And then she'll put 3 eggs in that nest.
She incubates the nest during the day, and at night the male takes over. They do this for about 28 days, and then the chicks hatch. At this point, the female heads off to try and start another family, and the dad takes care of his chicks. If he's successful at keeping his babies safe, the chicks will start to fly about a month later. These chicks that start to fly are called fledges. Biologists like Maddie survey them because they're really important to tracking the recovery of the snowy plover. This is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Western Snowy Plover Recovery Plan. It's a big document, but it outlines the metrics that have to be met for the snowy plover to be delisted as threatened. And one of those metrics has to do with fledges. Across the range, there needs to be a rate of 1 fledge to every adult male for at least 5 continuous years. If that 1-to-1 rate is maintained, it means that the population is holding steady. Another key metric is there's got to be at least 3,000 adult plovers across the whole range for a decade. But they can't all be concentrated in one area. The Fed's recovery plan divvies the whole plover range into 6 units. The San Francisco Bay is one, and the San Mateo Marin coastline is another. That 3,000 adult plover goal is broken down even further for each of those areas. In the Bay, we're getting closer to hitting our goal of 500 adult birds, and once we do, it has to be sustained for 10 years. But to hit all these criteria, there needs to be good plover habitat. Having a plan to sustain those spaces for them is also a criteria in the recovery plan. But maintaining good plover habitat isn't easy, and one of the main threats to plovers are predators. In the Bay, it's a lot of crows and gulls.
The birds are threatened because they are facing different pressures from habitat loss to predation. Those two factors combined have created a really difficult system for the birds to successfully nest out here on the beaches, whether it's eggs and nests getting taken or chicks not being able to fledge due to being picked off by predators in the area. So we try to do whatever we can to help them get to the point where they're able to fledge.
This is Parker. He's a biologist doing the same work as Maddie, except he's doing in-point rays. And to deal with the issue of predators, biologists like Parker put exclosures over known nests.
There are holes large enough for a plover to get through, but not for a predator, say a raven or raptor or coyote. They wouldn't be able to reach the eggs from there.
At the San Francisco Bay salt ponds, there's the same issue of predators. In Menlo Park alone, for example, 37% of nests last year were raided by predators. Around the Bay, plovers are also dealing with the loss of their habitat due to the wetland restoration project. Flooding plover ponds to restore them to their historic wetland status can impact where plovers nest. For example, at the Menlo Park Pond Complex, a key plover pond was restored to its wetland habitat between the 2023 and 2024 breeding season. In 2023, there were 22 nests observed on that pond, but in 2024, there were only 2. That decline is being partially attributed to the flooding of that pond, because when the pond was covered in water, the plovers couldn't nest there anymore as easily. But project organizers are determined to keep some of those dried salt ponds that are part of the project as just that, dried salt ponds. Remember that Bay Area goal of hitting 500 adult birds for a decade? Salt Pond Project folks want at least half of those birds to be on their project land. And here is the pond I was at with Maddie. There's a bunch of plover nests over here. And the water levels here are being controlled to create ideal plover habitat. For example, at the start of the 2024 breeding season, there was too much vegetation here. So the pond was flooded to kill off those plants, and then the water was allowed to drain back down. When the plovers are nesting there, a system of canals and a water control structure is used to keep the pond from flooding. Oyster shells are also spread on ponds plovers use because they like to nest near them. But there's a flip side to creating really great plover habitat. Having very few and densely populated areas where plovers nest puts their numbers at risk if something happens to that habitat. One solution to this problem is to diversify where they nest in the bay, but that's made equally tricky by this patchwork of land ownership around the area. Plover numbers are undeniably increasing, and it's thanks to decades of conservation work.
And so it's sort of just this kind of like thought of hope that when we as humans do put our minds to something that we want to see change in and we work on it, that change can happen, you know. And I think plovers are sort of like a really good case study of that, given how their populations have been increasing in the last few years.
In Point Reyes, there was a 2011 restoration effort to remove that invasive beach grass the plovers don't like, and since then, smaller native vegetation has come back, and so have the plovers.
It takes a village, you know. It's not just one site and one set of people.
The plovers still have a ways to go, but it's going to be an interesting next few years to see how biologists and decision makers balance the need to help this species bounce back with the equally important salt pond restoration project.